Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador, for being here today. You started by talking about the military tensions in the region, so I was going to ask about your government's position on ASEAN. How satisfied are you that as a piece of regional multilateral kind of architecture, to use a term you've used several times in your opening statement, are you satisfied with the performance of ASEAN in reducing tensions? I note that in the last week in the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, there was a PRC Coast Guard vessel that blocked one of your resupply ships. So can you perhaps explain to the committee what your government's view of ASEAN and whether it has been a useful tool? Is it successful at reducing tensions? Because the look from here is that it's not succeeding in reducing tensions in the region.
Thank you for the very important question, Mr. Chair. The West Philippine Sea is an issue of extreme importance to the Philippines. We are on the front lines of efforts to assert the integrity of the UNCLOS as a constitution of the ocean. We also have under our belt the legally binding award from the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which we secured in 2016. For us, we are prepared to use all channels, all available peaceful and diplomatic means to arrive at a peaceful settlement, peaceful resolution of the issues in the South China Sea, in the West Philippine Sea. ASEAN has remained one of the very important tools that we have. We continue to talk to China within the framework of ASEAN in discussing mechanisms to manage the tensions and move on constructively. So ASEAN remains a very important platform for us.
My second question was going to be on the Belt and Road Initiative. I note that your government pulled out in 2023. Both of our governments are still members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The AIIB is a critical piece to funding BRI projects, but your government has pulled out at the BRI in 2023. So I'd like to hear what's the position of your government on why there was that pullout, and is your government considering pulling out of the AIIB as a kind of second stage?
Because of the developments in many parts of the world, including in our region, and the imperatives of economic development, there has been a process of recalibrating some of our engagements. Everything continues to be under review, and we will recalibrate to the extent that our national interest, especially at this point, the economic interest of the country. So we will go with what is best for our people.
And I was going to ask you, in the Indo-Pacific strategy that Canada's produced, there's many countries that are singled out to have their own pull-out sections. Now, the Philippines is featured, but it's usually mentioned as part of other ongoing strategies. It's not its own pull-out section. Do you think that's the place that the Philippines should have in the Pacific strategy that Canada has produced? Would you have liked to have seen more time spent making the Philippines a greater ally? And if so, like you can say if not as well, because you remain satisfied to work through ASEAN, that's an opportunity to work with your government. But if not, then what are the areas that Canada could better cooperate with the government of the Philippines?
Thank you. We will, as I said in my opening statement, we like to think that we are always special to Canada, especially because of the 1 million strong diaspora that has bound us together as family. While there is no special section for the Philippines in the Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada chose the Philippines as the site of the regional Asia-Pacific agriculture and agri-food hub. So we believe that Canada recognizes the importance that the Philippines plays in the regional architecture.
And I was going to ask you, then going back beyond ASEAN, what are the other opportunities that you think that Canada could use in regional organizations like APEC and others to further get involved in the region? And the experience of your government as well would be useful to know. What has been successful non-ASEAN but APEC-style organizations that we should be trying to participate in?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very important question. We are very gratified to see that Canada is taking a more active part in the region. We particularly look forward to Canada's chairmanship of the G7 next year, as we believe that this is a very important platform for Canada to do more for the region, to forward initiatives and programs that will benefit people on both sides of the Pacific.
I was going to ask you, it's interesting you mentioned the G7, but what about the chairmanship of Canada of the CPTPP? is that not of interest to your government, or is that in order of interest, it's what happens at the G7 has a bigger impact in your region, to your country specifically, and CPTPP is less? Why that prioritization?
All the regional institutions work symbiotically. We believe that each has a unique contribution that it brings to the table. Many people are looking forward to Canada's chairmanship of the G7, as this is the organization where most of the major powers in the region are on the table. But that doesn't diminish in any way the importance of the CTTPT, especially in the region.
In terms of trade, what do you think are the opportunities for Canada that we have not looked at yet for trade specifically to Philippines, beyond just obviously the very large diaspora and labor, a lot of people with important skills that we need in Canada, on the trade of goods and services, the opportunities that the Canadian market would have to sell to the Philippines? What do you think those are?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. That's a very important question for our country. We are really one of the challenges we have now is in terms of energy. The Philippines is highly dependent on fuel and oil-based, about 60% of our energy mix. So we have we just sent a mission here composed of people from our Department of Energy, Department of Science and Technology, to look at and a private sector to look at potentials for learning from Canada on nuclear energy. We have also passed amendments to our Renewable Energies Act, allowing foreign companies 100% participation in our renewable energy sector. These are sectors which Canadian businesses might want to
with
look at.
increased affordability, increased prices on everything, difficulty buying gas, difficulty buying computer. They shrugged and said, "Oh, it's just inflation." Well, it's not just inflation, Mr. Speaker. It is a focus that we have to have to continue to invest in Canadians. While telling Canadians that the and said, "Oh, it's just inflation. It's just inflation. Oh, it's just inflation." And said, "Oh, it's just inflation." And said, "Oh, it's just inflation. Oh, it's just inflation."
When you talked about energy cooperation, I understand that your natural gas field has largely depleted in the last several years, and that you are looking for energy sources. You mentioned renewables, which is encouraging, as well as nuclear. I'm wondering if you have a need to displace coal and oil in your electricity mix.
Thank you. The issue of energy is very important to the Philippines. One reason why we do not have many manufacturing jobs in the Philippines is because energy is expensive. Our current mix is made up of 60% is coal and oil-based solutions. About 32% are renewables. But if we had to rely on our own renewable energy, we can only produce less than 30%. So we really need to partner with other countries like Canada, who has vast experience in clean renewable energy, to be able to do that. We are committed to changing our energy mix and making it better by 2030 and then another goalpost by 2050. But we need the help of our friends and allies to do that.
I understand that the government of the Philippines a number of years ago approved the Philippines' first ever liquefied natural gas facility. I believe that was commissioned a year ago. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And are there any other proposals being brought forward by private sector companies that the Philippine government is considering approval for additional liquefied natural gas facilities?
Thank you. Yes, there are proposals on the table, and the Philippine government continues to encourage more investments in liquefied natural gas. As I mentioned earlier, we have a revised Renewable Energy Act, which allows investors, which allows 100% foreign ownership in renewable energy, in the renewable energy industry, to encourage more foreign players to come in.
Are the contracts, first of all, I assume that from what I've read, most of the energy purchased for your electricity system is purchased by private sector companies. Yes. That's correct. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And are most of those contracts purchased on the open? Is most of that energy purchased on the open market, or through long-term contracts negotiated by Philippine by these private sector companies?
They normally purchase through the open market.
Open market. Well, as you know, Ambassador, there's a new liquefied natural gas facility, our first, coming online in the next, hopefully, short few years off the coast of British Columbia. That will be able to transport Canadian liquefied natural gas to the Indo-Pacific region. And I think there's much interest here in expanding that export market, which I think would benefit the Philippines. I also note that you mentioned 60% of your electricity generation comes from oil and gas. Coal is also a part of that mix, I believe.
Yes.
And that has a substantially higher greenhouse gas emissions profile than does LNG. And so I'm wondering if there's any interest in the Philippine government working more closely together with the government of Canada, not just on nuclear and renewables, but also on the export of Canadian liquefied natural gas.
Thank you. There is very clear interest in all sources of energy that will help us improve our energy mix. The initial issue was the difficulty in transporting LNG, but now that Japan has committed to buy a huge chunk, we are closely watching because if it can get to Japan, then there's a very clear possibility that there's an economic sense for it to get to the Philippines. So we're watching those developments very closely.
I assume you're referring to the Japanese government's direction to Mitsubishi to secure long-term LNG contracts for Japan's future economic growth. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your testimony.
So it will be
Thank you,
split
Mr. Chair.
between Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Erskine-Smith and Mr. Juan. We'll lead with you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. You want me to give you a 2-minute and 30-second warning, or will your built-in clock suffice?
I've got a clock, Chair. It's all good.
All right.
Thanks. Ambassador, I appreciate the time. I have two questions for you. And first, this is a study in the context of the Canada-China Committee. And what do you think is missing from the Indo-Pacific strategy, or what do you think could be how do you think we can extend the relationship as between Canada and the Philippines to address one of the goals in the Indo-Pacific strategy, which is to counter the influence of China in the region?
Thank you. We believe the Indo-Pacific strategy is a very good first start. What people are watching in the region is how this strategy will be operationalized. Canada has taken very good first steps, like the establishment of the appropriate mechanisms, like the regional agriculture and agri-food hub. So we are looking at how the strategy will translate into concrete projects and initiatives that will make Canada's presence in the region felt and better appreciated.
I appreciate that. My last question is more human rights related. I find it quite interesting. You have a situation where Maria Ressa won the Nobel Prize. You have a situation where she was just the commencement speaker at Harvard just a month ago. And yet, while she was acquitted of some charges in the fall, I understand some charges remain outstanding. Now, that was under the previous regime that she was targeted, and I would say, to undermine journalistic integrity. What is the state of play there, and what is the government's view of Maria Ressa's journalism?
The fact that she was acquitted of some of the charges against her is the fact that the justice system works. It takes time sometimes, but the justice system is functioning, and it gives a sense of stability, and it gives a sense of structure. And we're closely watching the progress of the case, which is now in the judicial arm of our government.
Thanks very much.